maquette of the Carrara Tower in Seville, Spain. Notice the very fancy decorations and how they've used the molds and things. That material that they used for the skin of the building to keep out the cold and wind and rain is terracotta. Terracotta is baked clay. You can mold it, you can shape it, you can do things with it, and they did a lot of things with it. It's the Wrigley Building. It was built in 1921, 1 year after this bridge was completed. Wrigley started out by selling soap, and then he decided to give a stick of gum with every box of soap, and pretty soon the tail began wagging the dog. It was designed by Graham Anderson, Probst & White. Now the next building I want you to look at is the one where they say prime office space on our left, 75 East Wacker. It's that whitish area, and it's a small footprint building. It's only 41 feet wide at the base, and then the top tower is only 9.5 feet wide. It was done by Herbert Riddle in 1928, and when it was built, it briefly was the tallest building in Chicago. Now the next building is an interesting building. It's the tannish building, again with the corner tempietos and the kind of fancy top to it. Again, they're using the material terracotta because you shape it and mold it and color it in the factory and attach it here with steel braces. Called the Jewelers Building, designed by Dievar and Dinkelberg, because they had a system where it was the tallest building we had, tallest marble-clad building we had in Chicago. It no longer has that honor. You notice tripartite. It has a nice entranceway. It goes up, and then it has kind of the corners that are kind of like big shoulders, something symbiotic of the city. If you look at the corners and look at this tower here, this bridge tower, they resemble each other. It's called the Sidonley Building. They're printing. They're the major tenant there. Blair Kamen called it paste-on Parthenon, or exaggerated classicism. And if you look at the top, you have kind of a modern Greek temple up there. And again, the idea with these newer buildings was to make them look good. Do some design flag. That's Art Deco. Notice it has that tower, straight limestone tower going with an almost armchair effect because of the arms sticking out. One reason they built it that way is when they start building these tall buildings going up into the sky, the city of Chicago and other cities, that you're going to block out all the light and air and sun. And so you only go up 260 feet, and then you have to set it back. And so when you look at Art Deco, you almost have that setback feature to get along with the, and it has some decoration. But then in 1986, Skidmore, Owens & Merrill added this last third. That's with the black base and the 4-story mansard roof. And so we like to think of it as being kind of contextual in that the building City of Bridges. We have 25 bridges that are right around the city, right in the city, and 50 that are around going over the Chicago River. And I'll talk more about the bridges and their construction later on. That was designed by Cohn Pedersen Fox, finished in 1989. Notice its contextualism again. First of all, it turns as the river turns over here going down the South Branch. It has green glass which reflects the water here, and then the base of it with the portholes and the way it's designed, and once they finish Wacker Drive, well, it has some kind of resemblance to the riverfront as well. Considered by many, it was done that way because at the turn of the century, I said this river was important. We had something like 20,000 ships that came into this river each and every year. So if you can imagine this river, this one on our left is brand new coming up. It's just being built, and I really don't know much about it other than it's obviously basically commercial space, but basically condominium. You can tell it by the balconies. That's a whole new phenomenon taking place in Chicago. Everybody ran out to the suburbs after the war, and now we're enticing them to come back. And many of these buildings are bought before their storage warehouse, built in 1908, 1909. It had very thick walls. horsehair, cork, and what have you, because it was a cold storage warehouse. Notice it's some 6.5 acres, and it's a nice residential area. Again, just created in the last 4 or 5 years, as so much of this is just being redone. You know, the river has, look at how they've decorated this. Some look like office towers, some look like condos. Often these buildings have dual or triple purposes. They'll have condominiums, they'll have offices, and they'll have commercial space. Now you see the name Ward's up there on the right on that building. That building was built by Montgomery, well, the firm Montgomery Ward. They have just went out of business several years ago. That tell you when it has balconies sticking up. It's a condominium. They've redone that. It was done in 1928. The balconies kind of hide it, but notice how the verticals are pulled out and go up and down. Verticality in the 20s was emphasized in special, and I understand that's going high tech. And they've done a lot of work on that. It's really much more beautiful today than it was 3 years ago. They've really cleaned up the exterior. And I think this is on a historical record, so registrar, so they can't tear it down. But notice the horizontal arms sticking out. That's the Civic Opera building. You'll see when we get closer, it's been classically inspired, but it's still an Art Deco shape. It's the Opera House. It was finished in 1930. The designers were built this big modern, postmodern building, and they built a clock on top. Notice also that this insignia up there, that's, how many of you know what that insignia represents? That's the Boeing industry. They're now the major tenant. We persuaded them when they wanted to get their headquarters out of Seattle to come here to Chicago. And I think we, did a lot of things to really persuade them to come, made them an offer they couldn't refuse, so to speak. You should take a walking tour if you want to see which was the original Chicago style. We learned something in Chicago. We were the first to put it into practice. We went from load-bearing walls, access for people to walk along the river, and eventually we hope to have a walkway all the way going from where we were at all the way to Chinatown, where they compete with San Antonio or something like that. Now here again on our left is that Civic Opera building, which I mentioned, and I said its chances have gone up 4 times. In the middle here you have a big, large trading floors, 2 of them, one on top of another. Stock index futures, options, pork bellies, foreign currency. We do a lot of trading in Chicago. Now the next 2 buildings, first of all, I said there's no right angles in nature. So people shouldn't live in right angle buildings. And you notice the serpentine shape of that building. And most of these are kind of pie shaped. The core of the building is in the middle of the building. He also had a belief, and this, of course, it wasn't, it was 1886 for this building, it was not such a big deal. But when he built his first towers, and we're going to sex of the world who wanted to be where the action was, came to Chicago. And if Chicago, you might say that part of the reason the city is so interestingly architectural is because we had the Chicago fire and had to start all over again. And so we went through various stages of architectural types. You go to many European cities, they're beautiful, but all the buildings were built in the 1600s, 1700s, 1500s, 1400s. Here in Chicago, everything was burnt down, so we had to start over again in the 1870s, 1890s until the present day. Pentagon is the largest one in the world. Now we can look at some other buildings as well. Let's look on our right front. You see the building with the statue on top? That's an Art Deco building. Can you see it? That tower sticking up. You can't see the arms from this, but there are arms on it. Even has an addition in back of it. That was the Art Deco part, finished in 1930. Was a design by Halbert and Root. They in the details. We will build them well. We don't have to put any decorations, none whatsoever. The entranceways will be very simple. The tops will be tops. They won't represent anything.
I wonder if that's
and these buildings, this one was built in 1973. no, 83, and the next one is 73, and another two, and the last two, again, were built in the 1960s. Get that? Look ahead of you. Wait till we get underneath the bridge. By the way, while we're getting underneath the bridge, notice all the railroads running underneath these buildings. These railroads were here before the buildings were built. All these buildings had to be built, their caissons between the tracks. While that metal frame you see out there. And interestingly, the architect, Ralph Johnson, said, I'm not going to cover that up. I want you to see what we did, so to speak. Again, looking at these buildings on our left, it's a style of architecture. This is called the Chicago Merchandise Mart, built in 1930 to be a wholesale furniture mart. Everything you wanted from the home, retailers would come here and buy the various lines of merchandise. Built by Marshall Field, who was in the retail business, now wanted to capture the wholesale furniture business. The next building on our left is an old warehouse again, built in the early 1900s. It was a coffee warehouse. As all these buildings had commercial value to them. Then it was finished in 1913. It was for the Reed Murdoch people who were in the grocery business. They roasted coffee and made pickles out of cucumbers and, and kind of fed all the mom and pop. The city of Chicago bought it, and they had the courtrooms in there. Now the city of Chicago has sold it, and now you have the same old building. It's on the historical registry. You can't change it, but it's all being redone in time. If you look at the top, 300 square feet of riverfront. It's one of the classic buildings, I would guess you would say, in Chicago. If you get a brochure in Chicago, I think they had a movie, Blues Brothers. Didn't they end up in there or something like that? They had I know they had a movie where one of the cars came crashing out of the parking area. That building, Mies van der Rohe building. He died in '69, and that building was finally finished in '71. But just take a look at it. It just soars into the sky. I think of it as like Shaker furniture. Shaker furniture, has no frills to it. It's just well-made, simple.
I'm going to get a neck ache going up there.
It has that kind of beauty to it. Very attractive. Even Blair Kamen, one of our Tribune architectural critics, thinks it's a nice addition if it ever gets done. Now, you can make plans, but now you got to find people who are willing to invest in it. Okay, you saw the Wrigley building. We talked about that. And Little Pine Street now became Michigan Avenue, the extension of another great, magnificent mile. The Tribune building is kind of an eclectic building, too. And then it has kind of an Art Deco shaft, but then it has that neo-Gothic top and neo-Gothic base to it. That's the one with the American flag on top on our left. Complete with flying buttresses, which are just sheer decoration. Colonel McCormick of the Tribune offered $100,000 and 250 architects competed. And Raymond Hood and John Hull, some 7 Nobel Prize winners in that field of economics. Now this next building is it's a postmodern building, but it's Art Deco revisited. Notice how it goes shearing up, and then it's set back. And then they have some fun about 2/3 of the way up. They even built some modern flying buttresses, kind of tipping their hats to the Tribune building. That's the NBC Towers, Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. A very nice building. Railroads on this side, the other side. And again, notice the wonderful walkway you have here.
We were wondering if we were going to get
part of this walkway to Chinatown, as it were. And on the left, you have these whole new series of condominiums being developed and are developed. And then you will notice in the fountain here on the left, that fountain was designed by Dirk Lohan to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Water Reclamation District, or the changing of the flow of the river that we spoke about. 1889, this was built in 1989 to commemorate that. On the hour, the two parts of the city coming together, east and west, and you know, it just has all kinds of very beautiful fountain there. And this whole area, you know, it just, back there you can see one of the warehouses with the green caps on it. Drive that kind of defines the lakefront from the rest of the city. And then you see that big cloverleaf tower going up in the air on the other side of the river, on the other side of this road. That was done by two students of Mies van der Rohe, George Shipwright and John Heinrich. So well, because it's user-friendly, you can enjoy it. But when they built that building, it was kind of, what are you doing? That's on the wrong side of this roadway. So they were going to build 4 when they got 1 done, and that was it. Now on our left, we're coming to Navy Pier. Navy Pier was built in 1915 just to help some of the 20,000 boats that used to come in and out of here. It was built and it served that purpose. They're going to build 3-4 more piers. But then times changed. First the Depression came, then you had the trucking industry, and then some of the major commercial stuff moved out of the Chicago area in terms of factories and warehouses. We had a new harbor built about some miles south of here, Calumet Harbor. And so it kind of languished in the 30s. In the 1940s, the U.S. Navy took it over as a naval air training station out southwest of here in a town called Mokina. And we just voted to get Chicago water from our well water. And we are about 10 million people now that use this lakes for our drinking water. And I was talking, we had a little talk here, and I raised the question, is how much more territory can this river feed with water? And he said, you guys in Mokina may be one of the last that are going to get Chicago water. I call it Chicago water. It's like Michigan water. But if you're from Chicago, it's Chicago water, and it's the greatest water in the world. He says, in the last 15 years, we built 2,000 buildings over 18 stories high. It's unbelievable. But they're all postmodern. They're all building them now. All right, I want you to look at a couple of buildings. One building we didn't have a chance to look at. Right beyond that black box, you might say, you notice you've got 28, Halbert, and Roche were the designers.